Hello, and welcome to the on-demand training, Encouraging Client Engagement, How to Support the Change Process. My name is Franny Siegel, and I will be your presenter for this training. This training is eligible for 1.5 CE credit hours. This training is sponsored by AMK Counseling, which is an approved NBCC continuing education provider. AMK Counseling is solely responsible for all aspects of this program. This is an on-demand program, meaning it is video and it is self-paced. So you are allowed to stop and start it at whatever pace you would like to continue it. There is a supplemental handout that is available to download that has some reflection questions. So throughout this training, you may want to pause, stop, and look at those reflection questions as we are going through the different elements of this training. If you have any questions or concerns, or you need any accommodations for this training, please contact trainings@amkcounseling.com for those needed accommodations or concerns. Additionally, once you have completed the video, there is an evaluation and a quiz that must be completed following the training video in order to earn your CE certificate. You should be able to access these on the portal. And once again, I am your presenter, Franny Siegel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work for AMK Counseling as a therapist and a clinical director. My clinical experience includes working with clients who experience in individual therapy, who experience anxiety, depression, grief and loss, life transitions, comorbid conditions, executive functioning, skill building, and self-esteem concerns. Additionally, I specialize in acceptance and commitment therapy, and I offer ACT-focused training and consultation. As a clinical director, I also provide individual weekly supervision to our pre-licensed therapists. You can contact me for any questions regarding this training or any further support at franny@amkcounseling.com. Our objectives for today's training are listed below. What we will be focusing on today is, first off, identifying the signs of resistance in clients. Next, we will be working to understand and reframe the purpose of resistance in the therapeutic space. We are going to work to build awareness to our own views and challenges with resistance through the guided handout. And lastly, we're going to talk about some different principles and strategies to help confront resistance and empower client engagement in the therapeutic process. So let's dive in. So before we dive into the material for this training, I'd like you all to take a few moments and jot down some ideas to the questions I have listed here. Feel free to pause the video as you're reflecting on your experience as a therapist working with a client where resistance occurred. Make sure to think about how the client presented in sessions, how you as the therapist felt in sessions and outside of sessions, and also how it impacted your clinical work and overall confidence. Client resistance. Why are we bothered by it? If you're like me, client resistance tends to feel really, really personal. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I, like many of you, went into the helping field because of my lived experiences, my empathy for others, and my desire to connect and support people in their goals and values. We don't go into this field just for a paycheck. We do it because we value the work that comes in the mental health field. Additionally, mental health needs come with a vast amount of difficulties that oftentimes lead to making the change process a really challenging and difficult one. Therefore, when clients resist the change process, it tends to feel personal or like a reflection of our work with them. Now, a study done by Hubble, Duncan, and Miller in 2006 on personal communication actually found that extra therapeutic factors might contribute to up to 40% of client success in reaching of their goals, which means that a large majority of the work and the progress that our clients make isn't due to the work in the therapeutic space, but rather based on outside factors. However, when we face client resistance in the therapeutic space, it oftentimes brings up a lot of insecurities, self-doubt, frustration, hopelessness, maybe even burnout for us as clinicians. We oftentimes take the blame for resistance. And that tends to show up in the space. And when our clients can notice our frustration with their resistance, it actually adds to the resistance. So in this training, we're going to talk about how resistance pops up, how you as the therapist can start to identify signs that you might be feeling resistance. And we're also going to explore some reframes to help you understand that resistance is not counterproductive to the change process, but rather it's an essential part of the change process. I want to talk first about what might be some signs and indicators that your client might be resistant to a certain topic or discussion point in the therapeutic space. This can look like silence or small talk, where a client might only be talking about surface level issues or topics. This might be a client who is not showing up consistently to weekly sessions. Maybe they're canceling last minute for reasons that aren't quite clear, or they're just totally ghosting you and not showing up at all. This can look like any client who expresses ambivalence towards topics of change, hesitancy, or maybe even doubt that the change would be beneficial for them to make. This could look like a client being defensive of their actions, constantly having to share why they're right, or blaming others for the situation that they're in. It could look like some rigidity in their thinking patterns or the way that they describe situations, a lack of ability to take the perspective of others. Might be the client is, identifying homework in the space and identifying goals to work on outside of sessions, but isn't following through consistently on the homework or the expectations that you've set outside of weekly therapy. This could be a client who's not motivated themselves to start services. I feel like a lot of kids and adolescents might fall into this category, and that oftentimes their parents are directing them to come to therapy. It could also look like an adult who's being encouraged to attend therapy based on family, or potentially a spouse or a partner or friend's recommendation, and is really having a hard time identifying goals for themselves and is focused on the goals that these other individuals are encouraging them to work on. This could look like a client who says yes, but quite often, anytime you recommend a change or a shift in perspective. This crisis of the week client is a client who is very actively engaged and uses the space well, might take up a full session where you as a therapist feel like you're contributing a lot and supporting a lot, but they consistently come in with crisis after crisis after crisis, and they're not able to make sustainable changes or really process in the space with you because they're so consumed with going from one crisis to the next rather than making change. Finally, another sign of client resistance might be if there's any rupture in your relationship. If there's conflict in the space, if a client reaches out to terminate sessions unexpectedly, that might be an indication that they're feeling resistant about the topic of discussion or area you're working on. It's also important to think about how we as a therapist might feel when resistance is coming up and what that might look like. So that might look like you as the therapist having to argue a point or sort of defend yourself and why you think a change is necessary. It might look like incongruent posture, where you're sitting up at the edge of your seat, very straight and very engaged, and the client might be laying down or laid back or not super engaged in their posture. This could feel like working harder than the client, where either you're having to guide the conversations every week, maybe you're doing extra prep work outside of sessions so that you have enough to talk about with them. This could also feel like holding the therapeutic tension, feeling pressure to make your clients change, or feeling pressure to help them progress in their goals. If you're thinking about these clients frequently outside of work, I think especially if you are, home in the evenings, if you're thinking about the client before your workday starts, and especially on weekends when your work brain is off, if you notice thoughts popping up about this client, that might be a sign of resistance. If you're talking about the client in consultations or supervision from the lens of me, might be a sign that you are over involved in the client's problems rather than taking that outside perspective. If you feel dread before or after sessions, or if you get an email from a client and you have a feeling of dread, that might be a sign that there's some resistance going on. Any of your personal indicators for burnout, stress, and drainage are going to be a sign of potential resistance in a client case. And finally, if you notice that you're questioning your clinical skills and your clinical judgment, and you're feeling like you're not good enough, or you're not doing enough, or you don't know how to proceed, that might be another sign of resistance. So again, feel free to pause the video right here. And if you want to reflect on some other indicators that you notice within your clients and you notice within yourself as a therapist that indicate there's some resistance going on. Resistance tends to pop up differently at different stages of therapy with our clients. In the intake sessions or at the beginning stages of therapy, that might look more like a client who's not able to engage in emotionally vulnerable conversations. They might be talking about surface level things. They might have a hard time opening up. Rapport is difficult to build, or potentially they are silent and they're not sharing much either. In the working stage, after you've built some rapport and identified goals with a client, resistance might look a little bit more like a client who's ambivalent about making changes, or a client who doesn't follow through on their homework, or isn't receptive to any of the feedback you as the therapist have to give. Finally, at the termination stage, this is the point when you as the clinician have determined that the client is ready to go off on their own and wrap up services. So I think resistance can look like a client who is starting to bring up old problems that you've worked through with them, or is identifying new crises, or is resistant to stepping back and feeling confident in their ability to manage their different stressors on their own. And just as resistance pops up differently at different stages of therapy, we want to approach it differently at these different stages. During the intake and beginning stage of therapy, we want to remain curious and focus on building rapport with the client and creating a safe space. During the working stage of therapy, we also want to practice a lot of curiosity, take ourselves out of the expert role, and really, really try to meet the client where they're at. Finally, at the termination stage, we want to empower and encourage our clients and remind them that they are incredibly capable to manage anything that comes their way. We'll dive deeper into different ways to approach resistance later on in this training, but I did just want to highlight that it's important to reflect on the different stage that your client might be in, and how their resistance might show up differently at those different stages. On this slide, I have 3 different theoretical models for why resistance might occur in the therapeutic space. Taken from the psychoanalytic approach, Freud's model suggests that resistance results from clients' confrontation with unresolvable conflicts. Our egos have specific defense mechanisms, such as denial, isolation, intellectualization, displacement, projection, etc. And as a result, clients are unaware of their actual problems as a protective measure. And so resistance is their defense mechanisms actually protecting them from unresolvable conflicts. The behavioral model suggests that client resistance occurs because the client is not able to comply with therapy because there are inappropriate reinforcers for the behaviors that they need to change. Resistant behavior occurs when positive actions are not reinforced appropriately. So there's a need for more immediate gratification or more immediate reinforcers in order to make changes occur. The cognitive model for resistance states that resistance is the result of unrealistic expectations or other irrational beliefs. Like with other theories, the way to work through irrational beliefs or unrealistic expectations is to confront it, challenge these thoughts, and to move forward. So these are a few models that support why resistance may occur in the therapeutic space. It's important for us to talk about how, as the therapist, we might contribute to more resistance in the therapeutic space as well. One reason is there might be a values clash between our personal values and the values of our client. When this occurs, likely the therapist values are overly present and the therapists want the client to change more than the client wants to. Basically, it's placing the therapist values and potentially the therapist agenda on the client. Additionally, if we as the therapist are too fused with our goals for the client, if we're too fused with how we want to structure sessions or the goals that we want the client to be meeting, that could also lead to more resistance. Being caught up in the problem-solving mode or the writing reflux, which is the therapist's, desire to fix the client rather than allowing the client to resolve conflicts and identify goals based on their own strengths and empowerment, can lead to more resistance. If we're going too fast, if we're moving through a topic or a discussion point too quickly, the client might feel pressure to fix it and therefore may not actually resolve it or may not be ready to resolve it, or may not have processed it enough to resolve it. And so that can lead to resistance. When we as the therapist feel inadequate or uncertain or insecure about our role, that sometimes can contribute to going faster or getting caught up in problem-solving mode rather than being present with our clients and meeting them where they're at, and can contribute to more resistance. Any use of ineffective questions, if the client feels like they're being badgered or poked at, or if questions are not being used to help guide them through and create understanding to their problems, rather are used to make them feel guilty or make them feel worse about the fact that they haven't made changes, that can add to resistance. Finally, there might be some expectations or unrealistic thoughts that the therapist has about their role in the space that could contribute to resistance. Some of these unhelpful thoughts include, my clients want to change. My clients do not want to change. My clients should not be ambivalent to change. My job is to make clients feel better. It's beneficial to remove my clients' distress. The more pressure I put on my clients to change, the faster they will. My job is my life, and I am responsible for my client's behavior. When we feel like a client is being resistant to change, we are actually being resistant to our client's position. And so as we continue through this training, we're going to talk about some ways to avoid these pitfalls and really, really tap in to accepting the resistance that our clients are bringing up. Ultimately, resistance is not the client's problem. Resistance is the therapist's problem. And this is going to be huge for us to really reflect on throughout the rest of the training, and remember that when we notice a client being resistant, oftentimes we are being resistant to them. And so instead of, pushing back against the resistance, we need to learn to roll with the resistance and accept that any resistance that occurs in the therapeutic space is our problem, not the client's problem. In order to help support rolling with the resistance, I have a few helpful reframes listed here on why resistance exists in the world and how it actually is beneficial to the change process. So without resistance, all social systems would dissolve into chaos and confusion, changing with every new idea presented. There would be no sense of self without resistance. Resistance allows us to identify what's right and what's wrong in the world. Resistance can be a good sense of judgment or mental health. So without resistance, there would be no mental health and judgment. Resistance is what prevents us from buying everything on the shelves when we go to the store. Like, resistance is necessary. And so I hope that these reframes can help you sort of challenge maybe some of the thoughts you have about client resistance and start to embrace it in the therapeutic space. Here I have some reframes about the therapeutic space that I think are also helpful. Resistance can be a reflection of the developmental level of your client. Resistance might be a signal that the client is dealing with an important issue. This next one is huge for me. I oftentimes have to repeat it to myself that you cannot change your clients. You can only change the way you interact with your clients. And resistance could be an indicator that the client is fighting against unjust systems and a sign of empowerment. So these are all things and phrases that I hope help you all challenge the way we view resistance and sort of start to reframe it as essential and not a reflection of your clinical skills and abilities, rather as a part of the therapeutic space and a necessary part of the therapeutic space. I'm going to take a second here to highlight the importance of cultural competency when we're considering resistance in clients. It's so essential that we practice cultural humility in our work with clients, especially when we are noticing resistance. Oftentimes, resistance may not be an indicator of actual resistance, but it could be a difference in cultural norms or cultural identities between the client and the therapist, or values. It's incredibly important to remember to, first off, reflect on how your culture and your identity influence the way you interact with clients, how that might be similar to the client across the room from you, how it might be different, and continue to practice open-mindedness, respect, and empathy while you curiously engage with a client from a different cultural background, and remain open to understanding their traditions, their values, and how something that may be seen as resistance really is more of a cultural norm or maybe a part of their identity. It's incredibly important to continue to educate yourself through continuing education, be open to learning from other people's experiences, and also make time to reflect on your experience and really understand how your identity shows up in the therapeutic space and how it might influence your relationship with your clients. One last thing I want to note here is the idea that all clients are ambivalent to change. I think really being open to embracing this statement and understanding that, even our most motivated clients, even our most consistent clients are still ambivalent to change. And resistance is going to be a part of that ambivalence. And so rather than fighting it, we as the therapists need to embrace it in this space. I'm now going to do a brief overview of the stages of change to help understand what those look like before we dive into some principles and strategies to help move clients through the stages of change in the face of resistance. So starting on the right, we have the pre-contemplation stage. This is the stage when people are not intending to take action in the foreseeable future. People can spend years in this phase. Oftentimes, people that are seeking out treatment in this phase are doing so because of pressure from others. And when the pressure is removed from others, they tend to drop out. Oftentimes people in this stage have tried to make changes on their own and have failed to do so. So there's a lot of guilt, shame, maybe some demoralized thoughts and feelings about their ability to change around the current problem issue. We tend to not see a ton of clients in private practice at the pre-contemplation phase. Most people are coming willingly, but this could also look like someone who has received a threat of a job loss, maybe a divorce. If they don't start going to therapy, it could also look like court mandated. I think a lot of these individuals end up potentially in community mental health type settings versus private practice, where our clients are a little bit more motivated to engage. Some of our children and adolescents who are being encouraged to attend therapy or, their parents have signed them up for therapy might be in this pre-contemplation phase. So we do see clients at this phase, but just not a ton based on the nature of the work that we do. Within our client population, you might hear things like, I wish, I guess I have faults. They may see an issue as something, but don't think that it needs to be changed. How do we help at this stage? It's really, really important to focus on rapport building. You want to engage the client in discussions around the issues and explore what is problematic for them. And any acknowledgement of a problem or problem issue is going to be considered a success at this stage. Remain puzzled, be naive, ask a lot of curious questions. Don't point out obvious critique or lack of engagement, because that's also going to drive these clients away from the process. An individual at this stage is going to be a big avoider, so don't try to challenge avoidance, more so roll with it. Next, we have the contemplation stage. This is a stage where the person or the client is aware of that a problem exists, and they are intending to make a change in the next 6 months. Again, people can spend years in this stage as well. This is a stage where the client is really struggling with the pros and cons of change. There's a lot of ambivalence that's present. And the ambivalence is occurring because the internal conflict between the sacrifices and the benefits of change keep people stuck in this stage. So there's awareness that there's a problem, but there hasn't been any actionable steps or commitment to action to make changes to the problem. You might hear, I think I should do this. I know I need to work on this. I have a problem I should work on. So again, there's going to be a lot of acknowledgement of the problem. There's just not going to be follow through or steps identified to make those changes. There might also be a lot of procrastination at this stage as well, putting things off, avoidance of taking steps to cultivate change. How we want to support in this stage is continue to explore the internal struggle that's occurring between the pros and cons of change. So we don't want to measure success at this stage by a client being ready to take action. Rather, it's successful. A client is successful at this stage if they are able to engage in a conversation around the pros and cons of making a change. The next stage is preparation. This is a stage where the client is ready to take action in the immediate future. We sometimes get clients sort of at this preparation phase where they've sort of identified a problem, they know what steps they need to take, they jump into therapy, and they're really ready to go. And so there may have even been some small changes that they've taken, such as seeking out therapy or maybe making some routine changes or behavioral changes to support the goals that they have. How we want to help is by continuing to encourage commitment to those goals It might look like at this stage, slowing our clients down so that they really can process where they're at and really identify actionable steps to make those goals happen. I know a lot of clients come into therapy and get at this stage and get really, really excited to make changes. And then when they're not able to make changes right away because maybe they haven't reflected enough on the problem, they haven't broken down the steps in small enough chunks, they get burnout in the process and then sort of give up. So we really want to be mindful of a client who's starting therapy in the preparation stage to remind them it's okay to slow down, and that the reason we're doing that is to help them identify sustainable, actionable steps to reach the goals that they have. The next stage is action stage. So this is where a client has made specific modifications in their lifestyle. They have identified goals. They have started making steps. They have engaged in the identified changes that they want to make. So they're in the midst of change at this stage. There could be some unanticipated consequences occurring at this stage. So clients may experience some barriers or some resistance when those unanticipated consequences pop up. What we want to do to support our clients at this stage is create a safe environment where all of the issues can be processed and analyzed. We want to really explore short-term versus long-term consequences and help our clients understand the difference between the two of them. We want to provide validation to any changes that they've made. We want to support any doubts they may be experiencing because of the changes they've made and potential consequences. And we want to promote continued movement. So really being mindful and engaging in discussions about what potential relapse could look like, what might trigger relapse, and how do we prevent that. The maintenance stage is where a client has cultivated continuous movement towards their goals and change. So major changes are already in place at this stage. They are more confident that they can continue the changes that they've made. You're maybe doing a little bit more instead of identifying goals. You're exploring how to continue reinforcing their goals and the changes that they want to make. You want to explore what is working with these clients, reinforce what is working, and not doing that is actually what can lead to relapse. Maintenance stage is a really, really fun place to be in therapy. When a client can get there, a lot of times they have the capacity to start doing some self-actualization work, potentially identity work. This is where we can really go deep into who are they and what brings them value. So I personally really, really enjoy the maintenance stage of therapy, but it's important to acknowledge that relapse can occur, and that's our last stage here. And so that's when an old pattern of behavior comes out again or backslides. First off, this is going to happen to all of our clients. They're human. They are not perfect. Any change that they are making has a potential for reversing back. So it's really, really important at this phase to provide a lot of validation to our clients, to be supportive, to explore what's going wrong, what went wrong when they're ready to do so. We don't want to add any more shame and guilt to the relapse that occurred. The fact that they are willing to share that they have some old patterns coming up again or have backslid on some goals is significant enough that they're acknowledging, that's showing they're in that contemplation preparation to reestablish action around what hasn't worked. And And it's also important for us to sort of anticipate that relapse will occur. And so we are not disappointed, or we do not feel like a failure in the work that we're doing with clients when they reach this stage. And now I'm going to talk about 9 different principles that you as the therapist can use to help combat resistance when you notice it coming up in the therapeutic space. Starting with the first principle, do the unexpected. Our clients are oftentimes going to be feeling embarrassed, potential judgment, or they might feel shame or unwilling to discuss a certain problem, as it might make them feel inadequate. So when they're bringing up problem areas in their life with us, they may anticipate criticism from us as the therapist. Resistant clients tend to anticipate certain responses or answers that reinforce the status quo. Oftentimes it's due to the fact that they feel like change is outside of their scope, or that they're incapable of doing it. I also think it's important to highlight that our clients oftentimes have peers, colleagues, friends, family that they go to with these problems. And oftentimes they're getting feedback from those individuals on how they should fix their problem. So if societally typical responses help them solve their problem, our jobs wouldn't need to exist. So what we need to do is to do the unexpected. And what that looks like, it might seem like second nature to us, but this is going to be unexpected by our clients, is continue to provide empathetic responses, engage in exploratory questions, present with minimal criticism, take a non-judgmental posture, one of openness and a welcoming energy. And finally, we want to be curious and really take an interest in what's going on with the client. And that to them will feel unexpected from what they're receiving from most others in the world. The second principle is to slow the pace, focus on the details, and process the feelings relative to meaning. So the first part of this is slow the pace. Oftentimes when there's resistance, for us as a therapist, we might feel an urge to speed up the session, to work through and solve the problems related to the resistance. In order to slow the pace, what you want to do is increase your use of silence, because what it does is it gives the client an opportunity to process what's going on, to think, and ultimately our clients are going to be more uncomfortable with silence than we are, and they'll tend to fill the space in that way. It's important to practice more silence and give them space to process, because that's what allows the details to come out. It helps break down the problem into more manageable segments by exploring the details. You can understand the person, place, the time. It helps us explore more viable solutions. I know I have gotten stuck in the resistance with clients when I try to throw out a solution before getting all the details and maybe hearing that they've tried something similar or they've tried that specific solution already. And we also want to seek out the details because it allows our clients to feel seen and feel validated. And then we'll create just a more open environment where they'll be receptive to feedback when we make a suggestion to them. It's important to help our clients identify emotionally compelling reasons to change, because those are going to be more motivating than just logical reasons to change. Again, our clients are already in therapy. They're talking about their problem. They likely know the logical reasons to make a change. So help them identify emotionally compelling reasons to help motivate them why change would be beneficial. What this principle really helps you do as the therapist is, instead of pushing them through the change process or pulling them to the other side of the change process, it allows you to appear like you're walking beside them, maybe gently guiding them, but not forcing them through the change process. This certainly does not mean that we become passive. So really, really understanding that we're still very active in the process, but we're guiding the client at their pace and really focusing on the details and exploring the emotions related to the change. Last thing I want to note with this principle is that when we tend to speed up the conversation or what's happening in the therapeutic space, we are taking that therapeutic tension and pressure and putting it on ourselves. And it really needs to lie on the client. So by slowing down, focusing on the details, and processing the feelings, we allow that therapeutic tension to stay on them, which is where it needs to be in order for change to be created. The third principle is treat clients' resistance with respect. A lot of times the things that our clients are doing might seem silly, illogical, foolish, bizarre. We, from an outside perspective, may not understand why they're doing what they're doing. Regardless of what's going on, we need to treat our clients' perspectives with respect and dignity, which allows us then to honor resistance. If we disrespect the perceptions and the resistance, we therefore are rejecting our clients' realities. How can our clients trust us if we reject their lived experience from themselves? It's very common too that our clients are already very critical of themselves and the problems that they are facing. And so by respecting the resistance and their perspectives, we are removing that critical lens. We are accepting them, and we are creating a cohesive relationship where then they can openly discuss their problems and issues without judgment. So through this, you build more rapport with your clients by respecting their resistance. The fourth principle is to maintain an attitude of naive puzzlement. Oftentimes, if you take on the expert role with a highly resistant client, they are going to likely resist your position even more. And so what you want to do is encourage your client to constantly be explaining things to you, because the more that a client is getting into the details and explaining things to you, that means they're working hard. And the harder they're working, the less they're resisting in the therapeutic space. Additionally, if a client is constantly telling you things and sharing details, it's allowing you to paint a better picture of where they're at and what their needs are, and allowing you to understand them better. A good rule of thumb to remember with this principle is the more resistant the client, the less you know. The more motivated the client, the more you know. If a client is motivated, likely they're going to be really, really open to any feedback or suggestions that you give. So if you notice any resistance, you really want to spend some time in the details of what's going on, exploring their perspective, and you can do that by maintaining an attitude of naive puzzlement. Another point with this principle that's important to remember is that a good majority of communication is not just what we're saying, but it's nonverbal. It's our gestures, it's our tone, it's our body language. And so really, really being mindful about when you're implementing this principle, using your facial expressions, your body language to maintain this attitude of naive puzzlement. Oftentimes, you can demonstrate this to a client, not just in what you're saying, but more so how you're saying it. So that's important to remember when you're thinking about using this principle. Our fifth principle is to never label clients with terms that imply resistance. What this does is it prevents us from belittling our clients and reinforces the possibility of making change. Our clients do not need us to create more shame, guilt, or negative characteristics from the situation or the problem that they are facing. We may have to talk about problem areas or issues where they are lacking a certain desirable characteristic. And so instead of talking about negative things from the lens of things that they have wrong, talk about the lack of desirable characteristics. And that's how you can address certain issues in terms that do not imply resistance. I'm going to read a couple different statements here just so you can hear the difference in how those sound. So statement number 1, you are really stubborn. Statement number 2, at some point in time, you struggled to be open to other perspectives. So take a second to just think about how different those statements sound. When we use the emphasis on of having the negative characteristic, it's adding more resistance. However, when we talk about the same thing from the lens of lacking openness, it helps reinforce some of the goals that the client might actually be working towards and reduces feelings of shame or guilt associated with what you're talking about. Principle number 6 is focus where the client is stuck. Clients oftentimes deflect because they feel threatened or uncomfortable. Therapists tend to deflect because they feel uncertain or maybe insecure about their abilities to support a certain goal or change need. And so what that looks like when there's resistance is kind of this endless dance of avoidance. And so what we want to do is really, really meet our clients where they are at and engage them in conversations that feel like a deep dive on where they're feeling stuck. Clients who are in that pre-contemplation phase where they can acknowledge that some movement needs to be made can really, really appreciate this approach because it allows you to dive into the details and really understand their perspective. In order to get in the stuckness with clients, you really want to take that informational gathering approach. Be curious. Appreciate getting stuck with your clients. You know, when you are in a place of maybe an impasse or a forked road with the clients in that stuckness, model composure for them so that they know that they are okay and that they can get through it. And allow clients to feel uncomfortable with the uncertainty when you're in that stuckness. You have a really great opportunity with this principle to model how to cope with uncertainty and unknowing, and also demonstrate how to problem solve. Principle number 7 is frame desires in the positive. So don't just focus on removing the negatives. If that's the only goal, then you really don't have a sense of direction. And so you want to explore and reframe their goals in the light of what they're trying to get or what they're trying to become. This is where values work can be really, really beneficial, helping clients explore what they value and how they want to work towards that and how that can relieve some of their pain and suffering. Instead of a client who comes in and says, I don't want to be nervous, their goal might be, I want to go to this social gathering and be able to talk to more than one person. And that creates a much more manageable, attainable, and realistic goal than just, I don't want to be nervous. So by framing their desires in the lens of what they want to get rather than just what they want to remove, it allows us to identify more step-by-step plans on how to get there and understand the specific details of what they're trying to achieve. Principle number 8 is to confuse them if they are not already confused. So change is something that occurs when people feel uncertain. If someone is confident in their position, they tend to want to continue doing what they are doing. rather than being open to making changes. So with this principle, you want to, try to confuse them. Maintain curiosity if you notice they are confident about their certain stance. Keep seeking explanations and details because you may start to stump them. And then if a contradiction occurs, that's when you can gently explore that and help identify what their actual goals are. If you foster confusion, it allows them to be open to new perspectives and ideas. And that's the way that we can sort of roll with resistance. And then the last principle is to resist the urge to confront initially. Being in the helping field, we want to relieve our clients' pain. We want to help them reach their goals. We want every single person that walks into our room to be successful. However, confronting too early, jumping into problem-solving mode too soon can lead to resistance and actually can be counterproductive. This is where building rapport is really, really essential. The right to confront a client on a particular issue or problem solve with a client on a particular issue has to be earned. It is not just deserved. Premature confrontation often prevents the emergence of more significant issues that are critical to the change process. So spend time getting to know your client. If you're feeling resistance and you're noticing a desire to confront initially, that might be an indicator that you need to focus on the relationship and build more rapport and understand their perspective more before you confront them. Finally, excessive repeated confrontation can also promote resistance. So when we do notice that we've earned the right to confront a client and it is an appropriate time to do so, doing it in a way that's not excessive and creates more resistance is important. So these are some principles and some framework for you to sort of think about how to roll and combat resistance when it comes up in the therapeutic space, and sort of the mindset that you can take with your clients as you are noticing resistance within them. Next, I want to talk about some things that you can try to avoid that may contribute to additional resistance. So one of the first things you want to avoid in the therapist role is being in the expert role. The more resistant the client, oftentimes the less you know. The more motivated the client, the more you know. So really, really try to ask a lot of curious questions and allow the client to be the expert when you notice that there's resistance occurring. You also don't want to collude into their excuses of victimhood or powerlessness. It's important to discuss these perceptions and really understand the client's point of view. However, we want to lead our clients beyond just these feelings. Oftentimes, if we reinforce their perception of being powerless, it's going to teach them that they are powerless and that they aren't capable of making changes. Therefore, we really want to empathize without sympathizing, and we want to try to see their point of view, but not convey these feelings or these excuses. You don't want to argue or blame because that's going to create more resistance. Instead of doing that, what you want to do is focus on the details. The details will help you identify viable solutions that the client will get on board with, rather than you feeling the need to argue your point of view or blame the client for the problem that they're in. Finally, we also want to avoid excessive questioning. Questioning excessively can feel like micro confrontations, which might make the client feel like you're arguing or blaming and lead to more resistance. It can also produce unproductive answers. And so instead of excessive questioning, make use of the silence and allow the client to fill the space. All right, now it's time for us to get into the fun portion of this training, where we're going to talk about some specific strategies that you can pull into session to help enhance clients' motivation to change and also combat resistance. So we're going to be talking about a few different strategies and interventions from the lens of motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, solutions-focused, and strength-based approaches. First off, motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is an empathetic, person-centered counseling approach that helps people plan for change by reducing ambivalence and enhancing their intrinsic motivation to build confidence to make changes. And there are 4 processes that are involved in motivational interviewing listed below. So engaging, which is the rapport building and relationship building, establishing a therapeutic alliance. There is focusing, which is coming to a shared idea. Evoking, which is identifying the client's arguments and reasons for change. And then finally, planning, which is identifying from the desired change the next steps in order to start to cultivate and create that change. At various points in the therapeutic relationship, you might be focusing on more of these processes than the other. I think at the beginning, you're going to be doing a lot of engaging in the working and termination phase. You might be doing more of the focusing, evoking, and planning, but engaging continues to be an essential part of the therapeutic alliance and process throughout all the stages of change in the relationship. I also want to talk real quickly, and then we're going to dive into each of these specifically about the ORs. So open questions, which invite our client to tell their story. Affirmations, which recognize and acknowledge the strengths and direction of change. Reflective listening, which is outreach, engagement, fostering trust, and encouraging change. And then summaries, which is a more deeper level of reflective listening that can be used in moments of transition in session. So we're going to break down each of these and talk about how you can specifically use these to talk about the change process with clients in session. The first part of ORS is O, open questions. Open questions invite the client to tell the story in their own words. And it's allowing them to tell the story without a specific direction in mind, rather going where the client is willing to go. In order to effectively use open questions, first off, the therapist has to demonstrate a willingness to listen. And you have to be able to use this in conversation. So really practicing open listening and willingness to hear the client's story and perspective on things. There is a difference between open and closed questions. So open questions are the opposite of closed, where closed questions can be responded with a yes or no answer. So open questions evoke more details and allow the client to go in a direction that they choose. For example, a closed question would maybe be something to the effect of, did you have a good relationship with your parents? Versus an open question would be more like, tell me more about your relationship with your parents. A closed question, you might get a general idea of what that relationship looks like. But with the open question, you really get specifics and you really can understand the details of where the client is at in their relationship. Below, here are a few examples of some different prompts you can use to start off an open question versus a closed question. So take a second, jot down some prompts or some ideas that you think of when you're using open questions with your client and how that is helpful for you in guiding the conversation and getting them to open up more. So the next part of ORS is our A, affirmations. Affirmations are statements and gestures that recognize the strengths and acknowledge the behaviors that lead in the direction of change of our clients. These can be both verbal and nonverbal. I think a lot of times it's easy to create affirmations in verbal ways, such as some of the examples listed below. But I also think non-verbally, the way that we present in session, our tone, our facial expressions. If they're telling a story about something they're really proud of, maybe smiling and nodding along with them. Or if they are sharing about something like that is more difficult, providing an affirming space by being open and relaxed and showing that it's okay for them to open up about these things. It's really, really important that affirmations are genuine and congruent. We wouldn't want to make an affirmation that the client thinks is ingenuine or doesn't align with maybe their values or how they see themselves in the world. If a client is an adolescent and feels really great about their work in school, but is struggling with their confidence in the sport they're playing, it might be better to try and affirm their diligence to their schoolwork versus their persistence in practices, because that might feel more genuine and congruent based on where they're at. Finally, I love these two statements here. I think anytime I'm trying to identify an affirmation in session with my client, I'm basing it off of trying to reinforce one of these two statements, which is that my clients are enough and that my clients are capable. And so that's how I like to frame any affirmation that I use with a client in session. The next skill in OARS is our R, reflective listening. This is a skill that is primary in outreach. We use this a lot in intake calls as well as in those intake sessions because it allows a pathway for engagement, building relationships, and trust and motivation in the therapeutic space. It is really, really important too in preventing breakdowns in communication because it allows you to rephrase, paraphrase, or reflect the feeling of what the client is presenting with. In order to practice reflective listening, you have to be able to practice reflective thinking and then externalize that through verbalizing those thoughts. And in order to practice reflective thinking, you as the therapist have to have that willingness to listen, an interest in what the person has to say, and a general respect for their inner wisdom and perspective. There are a few different sources for breakdowns. Like I mentioned, reflective listening helps prevent that. So the three sources are not saying what is meant, which is done by the speaker. The last two breakdowns, not hearing correctly or a different interpretation of words, are breakdowns that are on the listener. So as the therapist, oftentimes we are playing the listener role. So using a lot of reflective listening can prevent breakdowns in communication with your client on your end by making sure you're understanding what the client is saying and that you have the same interpretation of words. It also can be a good way to reinforce so that they understand what you are saying when you are offering feedback or suggestions. There's three different levels of reflective listening listed here from kind of the easiest level to the more complex level. So repeating or rephrasing is when the listener repeats what has been said using synonyms, substitutes, phrases, and you stay really close to what the speaker has said. Paraphrasing is when the listener makes a statement that where the meaning is inferred. And then the most complex level of reflective listening is reflection of feeling. So that's when the listener emphasizes the emotional aspects of communication through feeling statements. And it is the deepest form of listening. Last thing I want to talk about with reflective listening is the use of overstating or understating a reflection. Through our gestures, tone, and emphasis on words, we can either overstate or understate, and each of them have a specific purpose. Overstating a reflection may cause a person to back away from their position or belief. So this can be really, really effective when a client is very caught up in a perspective or very rigid in their thinking, and you want to challenge that. Understating a reflection may help a person explore a deeper commitment to their position or belief. So this could be beneficial when you notice some hesitancy with what they're thinking, and it allows them to connect it to their values and understand the importance of it. So it's not just about reflective listening, but using reflective listening as a tool to increase the client's motivation and connection to their values and goals. Below, we have a couple example phrases of how you could start off a reflective listening statement. Finally, the last skill in OARS is our S, summaries. And this is a special application of reflective listening that you can use at helpful transition points, such as after the speaker has spoken, when you're transitioning from a particular topic, when you're sharing on a personal experience, or when a session is about to wrap up. And what summaries do is they ensure clear communication about next steps and where the client is at. It also helps provide stepping stones towards change. Below, I have a list of some steps to follow when you're creating a summary. So first, you want to start with indicating that you are making a summary. So that could be something like, let me see if I understand, or what I've heard is. The second step is you want to notice any change statements that the client has made. And there are 4 types of change statements listed below. Problem recognition, which is acknowledging that there is a problem they'd like to change. Concern, which is an acknowledgement of the potential consequences if they don't make a change. Intent to change, which is an acknowledgement that they would like to change, but they may not be sure how or what that would look like. And finally, optimism, which I think is the strongest one, which is a hopefulness that they have the ability to create a change. After you have reinforced those change statements that you've heard, you want to be mindful of any ambivalence and give the pros and cons of both arguments for both change and not making a change. So you might say something like, on the one hand, da-da-da-da-da, on the other hand, da-da-da-da-da. This is also a great opportunity for you to include some objective information that might reinforce why a change would be beneficial ultimately. So that can include your own clinical knowledge and expertise, research, any information that's been shared by the family or outside providers. You ultimately want to be concise and direct so that it's clear and that your client doesn't get lost in the details of what you're trying to summarize. You want to end with an invitation to include the client's ability to collaborate, such as, did I miss anything, or is there anything you'd like to add or correct? And depending on if the client is open to your invitation, you finally want to start planning for what that change might look like and what that next stepping stone will be. Using OARS together can be a really, really effective way to help the clients feel open to discussing their problems, feel affirmed in your support for them, prevent any miscommunications, and lead them towards change, and then allow you to start planning and taking steps towards the goals that they are wanting to reach. Next, we're going to talk about how to support the change process and manage resistance from the lens of ACT, or Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. ACT is a process-based therapy approach that allows clients to explore the workability of their current patterns of behavior and help them connect to their values to create meaningful purpose and a life of valued living. Through the 6 core flexibility processes of acceptance, diffusion, present moment, self as context, values, and committed action, you help clients build on their psychological flexibility. One of the ways that you can help support the change process through the lens of ACT is through this concept of creative hopelessness. Creative hopelessness is a tool that helps clients reassess their goals and their values by helping them identify how they've been avoiding their pain and evaluating through their lived experiences what that avoidance has cost them. First, I'm going to talk about the 2 points of pain that exist in our human experience, which is the pain of presence and the pain of absence. The pain of presence consists of experiences and feelings that we notice, reasons why our clients come to therapy. So this could look like depression, anxiety, trauma, self-doubt, relationship challenges, job loss, the pain that is very clearly observable in our lives. There also is this pain of absence. Stephen Hayes talks about how there are 6 core yearnings that we as humans all have. And when those yearnings go unmet, we feel this pain of absence, this other point of pain. Now, these core yearnings consist of the yearning for belonging, the yearning for coherence, the yearning for feeling, the yearning for orientation, the yearning for self-directed meaning, and the yearning for competence. Each of these core yearnings is associated with one of the 6 psychological flexibility processes. So through ACT, you are able to help clients acknowledge the pain of presence, the reason they're coming to therapy. And you also help them tap into what is the pain of absence, the core yearning that has been going unmet through the use of the problem-solving mode. And by use of this core psychological flexibility processes, you help clients use the source of the pain of absence to engage in self-directed meaning and purposeful action in life. The concept of creative hopelessness helps clients see is that oftentimes this pain of presence, trying to avoid the painful experiences in our life, actually creates more pain and spins us into cycles where we continue to struggle versus tapping in and acknowledging the pain and using it to connect with our values. So in order to help clients understand creative hopelessness, you want to walk them through the process of change and help them create an agreement to be open to exploring alternative patterns of change. So first of all, you want to ask them what they are looking for and what they want. You want to explore with them what they have been doing to get what they want. You want to ask them and summarize what their desires and their actions are. You curiously want to ask them too how things have been working by the patterns of behavior they have been engaging with. And then you ask them too how it's worked for them in the short term, how it's worked in the long term. And then ultimately, the goal is that the clients will hopefully say, well, what I'm doing isn't working. And you therefore ask them if they'd be open to trying a different approach. And that's where you can engage them in this agreement to start trying things through the lens of ACT and being more open to experiences and tapping into these 2 points of pain to direct to values-based behavioral changes. Through the lens of creative hopelessness, we actually are helping cultivate hope because our clients are so stuck in this cycle of, engaging in the same behaviors, having the same outcomes, experiencing the same amount of pain over and over and over again. We're able to help create hope here in that we help them explore the workability of their current patterns of responding. We help them let go of their desire to have emotional control. We confront what's called the good feelings agenda, or the idea that we only should feel good things or positive things, and help them be open to all sorts of feelings, whatever those look like, all sorts of sources of pain, whatever those look like. And then we also help them examine what they're avoiding and what the cost of that is too. So the concept of creative hopelessness is very much like a process-based and a conversational-based approach, but it can help clients see what I'm doing isn't working, and I really do want to make changes, and maybe I'd be open to what you have to suggest. Another skill that I think can be really helpful from the lens of acceptance and commitment therapy is practicing acceptance as the therapist. Obviously, from the name of acceptance and commitment therapy, acceptance is an essential tool when you're practicing from this therapeutic lens. It's really, really important for us to be accepting of our clients. Like we've talked about in this training, if we're not being accepting towards our clients, we're actually resisting them and we're contributing more to resistance in the therapeutic space. I have listed here a few different ways that you can try to practice acceptance when you're thinking about a client where resistance occurs. The first one that I want to suggest is look for good or bad language. Oftentimes in consultations, or even as we're conceptualizing in our minds in the therapeutic space, we might label how the session is going or how we're feeling about the client using either good or bad language. So in your supervision space, or again, when you're in sessions with the client who's demonstrating some resistance, try to be mindful about if you're putting any labels of good or bad language, and just observe when that's coming up and how you might be resisting the client more if you're labeling them with good or bad language, internally or in consultations. In session, you also want to be mindful of how your posture is. Oftentimes, when a client is resistant, we might feel uncomfortable, and that might cause us to tense up and close off. So in order to practice more acceptance, I want to encourage you all to practice a more open posture. Open up your shoulders and push them back and sit up tall. Rest your hands relaxed and gently on your lap. Maintain an open facial expression through nods, smiles, and other gestures that can demonstrate that you're open to the client's position and what they're sharing. Finally, the last way that I think it's helpful for us as therapists to practice acceptance is through the use of metaphors. And I want to offer up two different ones that I think can be really helpful for managing resistance with clients. The first one is quicksand. So if you ever get caught in quicksand, the rule of thumb is don't try to move a lot. Don't try to get out of it. Don't squirm, because what it's going to do is it's actually going to sink you deeper and deeper into the quicksand. If you get in quicksand, what you want to do is pause, remain calm, and trust that eventually the quicksand will stop and you'll be able to reach for a branch or call for help and get out. And I think that's a really great metaphor when we feel stuck with a client. Oftentimes our knee-jerk reaction is to move around, resist them, challenge them, rather than if we stay calm, allow the resistance to occur and see where it goes and see how far deep it goes. Eventually, there'll be an opportunity for us to call for help or challenge. Versus if we contribute to the resistance by moving, challenging them, we might actually sink deeper. Another metaphor that I think can be really helpful for practicing acceptance with our clients is riding the wave. So if you go to the beach and you plan on surfing, what are you going to do if you try to control the waves? You're probably going to have a lot of trouble if you try to control the waves while you're surfing. Rather, what you're going to do, if surfing is important to you, is you're going to get out there, you're going to sit in the water, observe what's happening, and then just try to ride the waves as best as possible to the shore, staying on your board and not falling off. It's like that with our clients. Oftentimes, as clinicians, we try to jump in and control the sessions or control where our clients are at or control their emotions and feelings. And these are things that are outside of our control. So rather than, trying to control the wave of where our client is going or how they're showing up in the space, we need to just observe it, take it for what it is, ride it as best as possible, and take note of how that felt for us. So those are a couple metaphors that I would encourage you all to think about and reflect on in sessions when you notice that there's some resistance, and think about how you can, resist moving in the quicksand and ride out the wave when you notice that it's coming around. Other approaches you can use from the lens of ACT are in helping clients engage in values clarity, especially when you're noticing some resistance. It might be the reason that they're resistant is that they don't see how it aligns with their overall values and their overall goals. So there's a few different ways that you can help clients explore their values and come to a more concrete understanding of what their values are. Some places you might want to look and you might want to explore with them is areas of their life that have been sweet, areas in their life and experiences that have been sour, times where they've maybe shown up as the hero, and then also times where they feel like they've had authorship in their life. And that oftentimes will give you indications of what their values are. A lot of times, too, you can play the devil's advocate to reinforce a potential reason to make change. This is, and to help clients identify the value of why they do want to make a certain change if they're hesitant, but they're starting to be ready to take steps, but they're not quite there yet. The devil's advocate activity, I would highly recommend making sure you have good rapport with your client first off, because so they know that you're coming from a good intention and you're not just trying to challenge them. If you don't have the rapport there, it can appear like you're trying to challenge them to not do something. Finally, to help them explore on what their values are, you can help clients identify where their points of pain are and try to connect it to finding purpose. So I sometimes like to do that through exploring past areas where they flipped pain to purpose and then reflecting on how they could do that in the present. Or again, like, if this pain was meant to teach you something, what do you think that would be, is a question I often ask, and then kind of see where the client goes from there. Another way that you can support clients' growth is through identifying actionable steps. So this is something that I like to do if I notice a client is resistant to a particular topic or making a particular change. I might try to just get them to make changes in general. And so I may have them practice what's called a just cause goal, where we identify something they want to do over the next week just cause. They don't have to give me a reason. They don't have to give anyone else a reason why, but they're going to do this action just cause. And what it does is it creates some accountability that you've identified something that they're going to work on, but it takes the pressure off of why they need to do it. Finally, another way that I like to use action to help clients make changes is I try to help them identify what they already are doing that's working and what routines that they have that are working well, and try to incorporate some of the new habits and changes into what's already working well. So these are just a few ideas of how you can use some ACT-based approaches to help clients create meaningful change. I next want to talk about some questions you can use from the solution-focused approach that may help manage resistance and get the client to open up to identify goals and steps that they would like to take. Solution-focused approaches tends to be more short-term based, really focusing on identifying steps and making changes rather than, getting into the processing and the meaning behind why those changes are important. However, I think the questions here can be really beneficial when you notice that a client is stuck or isn't quite sure how to make a change. When your client is coming in that pre-contemplative or contemplative place of saying, I know I need to do things differently, I'm just not quite sure where to go. So one type of question you can ask is a coping question. You can ask your clients how they are currently coping with the situation that they're in or with whatever struggles they are having. And what this does is help the clients recognize their own resiliency and identify ways that they already are working to cope. Another question that you can ask is the miracle question. So this might look like asking them, hey, if you went to sleep tonight and you woke up tomorrow morning and all your problems were gone, what would the world look like? How would you be feeling? What would you be experiencing? And this allows the client to tap into figuring out what the end goal is And then you can help them work backwards to identify small steps to get there. I think it also helps them imagine that there is hope for the future and that there is a possibility of things getting better. Similarly to the miracle question, you can ask them this best hopes questions. And this might be an alternative if the client doesn't feel like the miracle is attainable. Okay, what would be your best hopes for our work today in session? What would be your best hopes for how you would be feeling at the end of this week? And what it does is it helps the client identify achievable and realistic goals to work towards. Another type of question you can ask is the exception question, which helps clients identify when there have been times that there have been exceptions to the problem. It helps them tap into their personal experiences with and without the problem and explore the whole range of experiences where they may have worked through the problem or they may not have felt their anxiety as strongly. It also helps them understand the circumstances when the problems are more relevant versus less prevalent. Finally, the last type of question you may want to ask is a scaling question. And this helps the client rate their experience, rate the level of intensity that they experience the problem, helps them identify how significant the problem is, or maybe how confident they are in their treatment, or how they're feeling about how treatment is progressing. So it just kind of helps give some perspective on where the client is at and allows you to dive more into those details that we were talking about to help find viable solutions. All right. Lastly, I want to talk about some strengths-based approaches. Strengths-based approaches are approaches that focus on what the client does have rather than what the client does not have, and focusing on what is working rather than what is not. You are really emphasizing strength over struggle here. One thing that I find personally helpful as a clinician is to focus on having unconditional positive regard for my clients. So in the midst of resistance, in the midst of their difficulty engaging with the topic that we're at, or having a challenge with taking the steps that we've identified they need to take, I try to always think about one small positive thing that I can respect or appreciate about the client. I think ultimately, one thing that we should always identify as positive in regard is if a client shows up for treatment, if they come up to the session. That shows that they do have a willingness to be there and be meeting with you. And that's something to have positive regard and you can build on. I also think that if you as a therapist are struggling to identify something that you can have unconditional positive regard about with this client, that might be an indicator that there's some countertransference occurring, and you may want to process that in your supervision space. Another way to use the strengths-based approach with a client is to go through a strengths-based assessment and resource list. So this can look like, there's very formal ones online. You can also have this be more informal and sort of ask them questions about who in their life is a connection point. What do they think their strengths are? What do they think their resources are outside of themselves? It's important that we really, really try to instill hope within our clients when we're using this approach. We really want to remind clients of their own resiliency and strength, to remind them that they are capable of making changes. I think this is where you can really use affirmations to remind clients of their own resiliency and their ability to cultivate the changes that are necessary to be made. Finally, you want to foster autonomy and meaningful choice through strengths-based approaches. This helps empower the client. It helps them acknowledge themselves as the expert role. And ultimately, you can use this to help connect to their values so that they are creating goals and changes that are going to be sustainable and that they find meaningful and purposeful. All right. As we are wrapping up this training, I wanted to show the references I used to pull together all the information that was shared today. So you can access these resources for further information if you want to dive deeper into exploring client resistance. For next steps, after you complete this video, please complete the feedback evaluation on the portal. Please also complete the participant quiz on the portal. And finally, once you have done those two things, you will be able to download your CE certificate from the portal. Once again, I want to say thank you for participating in this on-demand training, which was sponsored by AMK Counseling. AMK Counseling is a group practice that is located in Chicago, Illinois. We have two separate locations in the Lincoln Park neighborhood and in the Ravenswood neighborhood. Our therapists are skilled at facilitating change and helping clients make meaningful shifts in their lives. We serve clients of all ages and offer individual, family, couples, and group therapy. For more information about our services, or if you're looking to get connected with support, please visit our website, which is www.amkcounseling.com. Lastly, I want to highlight AMK Counseling's CE program. AMK Counseling participates in community initiatives that increase access to mental health education. Our continuing education program offers clinical resources to mental health professionals who work hard to provide thoughtful therapeutic support within and beyond our community. Please contact trainings at AMK Counseling for any needed support related to this on-demand training. And please check back more on our on-demand programs and live trainings on our website, amkcounseling.com, for further CE program opportunities in the future. And thank you for participating today.